People often think that success begins when they finally feel prepared. They imagine a perfect moment in the future when every piece is in place and all uncertainty has disappeared. The truth is that moment never comes. Waiting until you feel ready is the fastest way to guarantee nothing ever happens. If you look at any breakthrough, whether it's launching a new technology or starting an ambitious project, it almost always begins with someone who didn't feel fully prepared but decided to begin anyway. The reality is that readiness is a myth. It's a construct that easily becomes an excuse. You could spend months gathering information, reading every article, watching every tutorial, but none of it truly substitutes for action. The moment you begin, you realize how much of your learning happens on the way. You discover real challenges that no book could have predicted and real solutions that only appear after you run into the problem. Action is not only the engine of progress, it's also the most efficient way of learning at scale and speed. Many people overestimate the risk of failing and underestimate the cost of doing nothing. They imagine catastrophic outcomes if things go wrong, but they rarely consider what it will cost them to stay in the same place year after year. The opportunity cost of inaction is invisible, yet it compounds silently over time. You look back after a decade and realize the greatest mistake was not the risks you took, but the chances you never took because you were waiting to feel ready. Instead of asking yourself, "Am I ready?" ask, "Is it important enough to start even if I'm not?" History rewards the ones who initiated before anyone else believed it was time. In fact, new ideas are often dismissed precisely because they appear premature. There is never any widespread consensus at the beginning. Most revolutionary projects start with a small group of people who are unreasonable enough to act on an idea when everyone else still sees too much uncertainty. In that moment, the difference between a dreamer and a pioneer is not belief, it is action. One is waiting for permission, the other creates momentum. Move toward difficult problems. Don't obsess over perfection in the beginning. Build the rough prototype. Push the first version out. It won't be perfect, and that's the point. Each iteration makes it better, and every failure contains information you can't get any other way. The key is to shorten the loop between idea and execution. The faster you try, the faster you learn, and the faster the solution emerges. If you wait until you feel fully ready, you will most likely miss the timing completely, and someone else will build what you hesitated to start. Start even if you only see the next 2 steps clearly. Most people want to see the whole path before they begin, but big visions are not executed in one giant leap. They are built through relentless iteration, thousands of small improvements, and continuous problem solving. Every advance reveals the next phase, and that is how large goals are actually achieved. The people who achieve extremely difficult things do not rely on feeling ready, they rely on persistence, experimentation, and a willingness to confront the unknown without hesitation. So if you have an idea that matters, begin today. Build something, test something, release something, no matter how incomplete it feels. Everything you need to feel fully ready will be built along the way. The world will not wait until you feel comfortable. The opportunity you have right now will shift. Markets, technologies, and circumstances never stay still. Momentum rewards those who move, not those who hesitate. Don't spend your life standing at the starting line, planning every detail. The perfect moment is never coming. Start now, adapt, keep building, and let the path unfold as you move forward. Readiness is often misunderstood as a prerequisite when, in reality, it is a byproduct of action, and so many people spend months or even years telling themselves they will begin when the timing feels perfect, when the market looks stable, when all the pieces come together. But that sense of being totally prepared never actually arrives, and they eventually lose momentum before even starting. If you look at the trajectory of every major breakthrough, whether it was the early days of building groundbreaking technology or launching an entirely new industry, the individuals who drove that progress forward were never completely sure of their capabilities at the start. Instead, they stepped into the unknown and dealt with each problem as it emerged. The idea of readiness becomes a trap because waiting for it turns into a form of procrastination that disguises itself as strategy. People convince themselves that another week of planning will make everything safer. Another month of research will remove all doubt. But the truth is that most knowledge is acquired through actual implementation, not theoretical preparation. Every prototype that fails teaches a lesson faster than any book or course, and every obstacle encountered in real time provides a level of clarity that no speculation can match. Each day spent waiting is a lost opportunity to collect data, build resilience, and gain the kind of confidence that only comes from first-hand experience. Confidence is not something you wake up with. It's something built brick by brick as you repeatedly do hard things without waiting for external validation. There is a point where thinking becomes counterproductive, and only the act of starting will generate the feedback necessary to shape your direction. Readiness is not a destination at which you arrive fully equipped. It is an adaptive state that grows stronger piece by piece as you move forward with imperfect knowledge. Those first steps often feel uncertain, but they are critical because they create the momentum that exposes real constraints, forces creativity, and eliminates the illusion of perfect conditions. People chase a feeling of certainty that simply does not exist in environments where innovation is required. And if you base your decision to act on feeling fully ready, you effectively guarantee that you will never do anything groundbreaking. The projects that define the future rarely begin with perfect clarity. They begin with a willingness to expose yourself to failure and to adjust faster than everyone else. Each delay compounds and creates a gap between you and whoever decides to act first. That gap becomes almost impossible to close later because they are learning through direct experience while you are still theorizing. The moment you take the first action, even if it is small, you immediately transform potential energy into kinetic energy. That shift is important because once you are in motion, the brain begins to solve problems more effectively as it is forced to adapt to real conditions rather than imagined scenarios. The environment pushes back, and that pressure develops the confidence you were originally waiting to have. Action is a catalyst for learning. Without it, your understanding of the problem remains shallow because you are only engaging with hypothetical models. The quickest path to mastery is to immerse yourself in the problem and allow the feedback loop to accelerate your growth. What feels like recklessness from the outside is actually a calculated understanding that progress is nonlinear and dependent on feedback obtained through direct action. When you start before you feel ready, you are trusting the process of iterative improvement, accepting that the first version will be flawed, but also recognizing that those flaws are the starting point from which excellence eventually emerges. Hesitation, on the other hand, freezes that process and locks you into a state of constant preparation with no real progress. Most people don't fail because their ideas were bad. They fail because they never truly started. They misinterpret uncertainty as a signal to delay rather than a natural part of building something meaningful. The people who create the most impact are not necessarily the ones with the most resources or the most flawless initial plans. They are the ones who are willing to step into the unknown and face the discomfort of not feeling completely prepared. Acting before you feel ready creates a psychological shift, which turns fear into focus, abstraction into tangible tasks, and doubt into a kind of fuel that pushes you to improve faster. You cannot simulate the feeling of launching something difficult. you must actually launch and discover what breaks. Only then can you refine, iterate, and move closer to something that works. Every day spent believing that readiness must precede action is a day in which nothing new is built. In fast-moving industries, delays are not neutral. They are costly because someone else will take the initiative you hesitated to take. There is a common misconception that the foundation of success is certainty, but the real foundation is the discipline to take action when certainty is absent. It is the recognition that clarity is often a result of progress, not a requirement for it. When you delay, you give fear the space to grow and doubt the chance to become permanent. You start imagining problems that don't actually exist and become overwhelmed by complexity, which would have been manageable had you just taken the first step. The people who advance rapidly learn not to wait for their emotions to align perfectly with their goals. They begin, and in beginning they force their emotions to adapt to the new reality. If you remain still, your psychology remains rooted in speculation and fear. But when you move forward, anxiety transforms into engagement, challenge becomes a puzzle, and resources you did not know existed suddenly become visible because you are now inside the system rather than outside looking in. Waiting to feel ready is like waiting for a signal that was never meant to arrive. You end up training your brain to believe that action must always be preceded by comfort, which is the opposite of innovation. Confidence grows only when you repeatedly choose to take the uncomfortable step. You must accept that the timing will never be perfect, the plan will never be complete, and the risk will never completely disappear. But the act of moving forward initiates a chain reaction of feedback, learning, and adaptation that eventually produces the confidence you wanted in the first place. People who achieve extraordinary results are not fearless. They simply have a bias toward action that outweighs their fear, and because they act early, they have more opportunities to iterate and refine. Each iteration builds real-world knowledge that becomes an asset, and over time, that asset compounds into expertise and confidence. But none of that happens unless the initial step is taken without waiting for the elusive feeling of readiness. Your future depends on how often you choose to move forward even when the plan is incomplete and your skill set feels inadequate. If you keep waiting for a perfect moment, you might miss the most valuable learning opportunities and let someone else solve the problems you were uniquely positioned to solve. The path will never reveal itself all at once, but every step you take illuminates the next. You must trust that competence and clarity are generated by doing, by testing, by failing, and by adjusting, not by endlessly planning in a static environment. So when you feel that hesitation, that instinct to wait for more certainty, remind yourself that readiness is the result of forward motion, and that every great endeavor started with a decision to act even though the people involved didn't feel the cost of inaction is often invisible in the moment, which makes it far more dangerous than any obvious failure. Most people focus heavily on what might go wrong if they take a risk, imagining all the ways things could break down or all the criticism they might face if an experiment doesn't work out. They rarely take the time to calculate what they are losing every day by not acting. Inaction slowly erodes potential, and because it happens so gradually, it goes unnoticed until it becomes irreversible. Time passes, opportunities shift, and someone else steps into the gap you left behind because of hesitation. It's easy to tell yourself that waiting will keep you safe, but safety can become a form of self-imposed limitation when it prevents you from entering the arena where real progress happens. Every year that goes by without action is a year in which your ideas remain untested, your skills stay stagnant, and the momentum that could have been built is lost forever. Failure, on the other hand, immediately teaches you something practical. It tells you what doesn't work, it highlights areas that need improvement, and it forces you to think creatively in order to find an alternative. That kind of feedback is incredibly valuable and almost impossible to replicate through planning alone. While failure can be uncomfortable, it at least gives you a direction. Inaction gives you nothing. It keeps you in a state of uncertainty that never resolves because you have no new data to work with. People underestimate just how much is lost when they continue to avoid action. They lose confidence because the longer they delay, the more they start doubting their own ability. They lose relevance because the world continues to change while they remain static. They lose credibility because people eventually notice that they are not delivering anything tangible. Perhaps the most damaging consequence of inaction is the way it builds regret over time. You look back and realize that your fear of failure robbed you of opportunities that may never appear again. Regret is far heavier than failure, because failure at least happened in the service of an attempt. Regret is the weight of possibility that was never explored. When you take action and fail, you can pivot, refocus, and ultimately grow from the experience. When you don't act at all, you never even enter the feedback loop necessary to pivot or improve. You simply remain stuck in an endless cycle of what-ifs and theoretical plans. It's important to recognize that most successful projects didn't begin under perfect conditions. They were often born in environments full of uncertainty, where the possibility of failure was extremely high. What separated the people who succeeded from those who merely thought about succeeding wasn't superior resources or information. It was the willingness to absorb the potential costs of failure rather than accept the guaranteed cost of inaction. Even small steps of action, taken consistently, can compound into something powerful over time, while inaction compounds in the opposite direction, slowly diminishing your confidence and narrowing your options. It is tempting to assume that waiting will give you more clarity, but clarity emerges from engaging directly with the problem. As you begin to move forward, even if your first attempt misses the mark, you collect insights that refine your understanding and help you course correct. Meanwhile, inaction provides no new inputs. It leaves you guessing and ultimately paralyzed by the endless possibilities. The more scenarios you imagine without testing any of them, the more overwhelming the decision becomes. Eventually, you develop a bias toward caution that makes any form of action feel risky, even if the risks are minor compared to the long-term cost of doing nothing. If you closely observe the trajectory of people who achieved remarkable results, you will notice that they often failed multiple times and continued to try. Their willingness to take the hit and learn from it gave them an advantage that cannot be gained through preparation alone. Failure hurt in the moment, but it propelled them forward and gave them a clearer understanding of what to do next. Inaction might have spared them that immediate discomfort, but it would have denied them the lessons that eventually led to success. Acting and failing is a form of investment. It returns knowledge and resilience. Not acting is a form of decay. It erodes potential and makes future attempts even more difficult because the psychological hurdle grows with every missed opportunity. The world doesn't remain static while you wait. New competitors emerge, trends shift, technologies evolve. The conditions you are hoping to be perfect will never align the way you expect. By the time you finally feel comfortable enough to act, the opportunity may have passed or transformed into something unrecognizable. You will need to adapt to an entirely new set of circumstances, which could have been much easier to navigate had you taken earlier risks and learned from them. People underestimate how often failure is forgiven, forgotten, and even respected when it leads to eventual progress. But they also underestimate how often inaction is remembered as a sign of fear or lack of commitment. People want to follow those who move, not those who wait. Taking action builds momentum that attracts others, while inaction makes you invisible. Every decision to delay becomes a small vote for the status quo, and over time those votes accumulate into an identity. You start to think of yourself as someone who plays it safe, who avoids risk, and who needs perfect certainty before stepping forward. That identity becomes more difficult to break with each passing year. If you want to create meaningful results, you must recognize that the cost of inaction is silently stealing your future, while failure at least offers the possibility of improvement and transformation. You may hesitate because failure feels final, but in most cases it is simply a temporary setback that provides valuable information. The real danger lies in failing to try at all, because then you never develop the ability to recover, adapt, and ultimately succeed. Action creates a path for you to grow. Inaction traps you in a fixed state where the only certainty is that you will remain exactly where you are. The longer you stay there, the more firmly that reality sets in. You cannot expand your capabilities by staying within your comfort zone. You cannot discover new solutions by clinging to old habits. Sometimes the risk is not in doing something new, but in refusing to evolve. If you want to avoid regret, you must accept that discomfort and uncertainty are unavoidable companions of meaningful progress. The discomfort of action is temporary and can lead to growth, but the regret that comes from inaction can last a lifetime. When presented with the choice between moving forward and staying still, recognize that staying still is not neutral. It has a cost, and that cost grows with time. You might fear that taking action will expose you to failure, criticism, or disappointment, but it is often better to face those challenges and gain the lessons they bring than to remain in a state of stagnant safety, where no lessons are learned and no progress is made. The cost of inaction is that your potential remains theoretical, your ideas stay dormant, and your impact never materializes. Acting, even imperfectly, at least brings you closer to turning possibility into reality. If you keep waiting for certainty, the window of opportunity may close before you realize it, and the vision you once had will eventually fade into something that feels too distant to pursue, leaving you wondering what might have happened if you had chosen to move forward instead of starting with a rough version. And committing to rapid iteration is one of the most effective ways to accelerate progress, because perfection at the outset is not only unrealistic but also counterproductive and creates a bottleneck that prevents momentum from building in the first place. When you start with a rough prototype, you gain immediate access to real-world feedback that can inform each subsequent version with accuracy and relevance. You avoid the trap of designing in isolation, where assumptions remain untested and flaws stay hidden until it's too late to pivot efficiently. A rough version transforms abstract ideas into tangible reality, and that shift is essential because only then can you observe how users or real-world systems actually respond to the concept. Every iteration exposes weaknesses, clarifies strengths, and challenges you to solve problems in real time. By iterating quickly, you compress the learning cycle and reduce the delay between identifying an issue and implementing a solution. Instead of spending months trying to perfect every feature before releasing it, you focus on building something functional enough to test and then adjust based on actual data. This approach allows you to allocate resources more intelligently by directing effort toward elements that genuinely matter rather than guessing which features will have the most impact. A rough first version also helps you stay flexible and open-minded because you are not emotionally attached to a single blueprint. When you spend excessive time and energy trying to build the perfect initial version, you become resistant to change and less willing to discard parts of the design that no longer make sense. Rapid iteration, however, embeds adaptability into the process from day one. Each new cycle becomes an opportunity to test bold ideas, remove unnecessary components, and explore alternative paths. This kind of experimentation is often where breakthroughs occur because it pushes you to solve problems creatively rather than sticking rigidly to a predefined plan. Iteration also builds momentum by turning abstract goals into concrete progress. Seeing even a basic prototype come to life creates a sense of urgency and focus that planning alone can never replicate. Momentum fuels motivation and attracts others who want to contribute or invest, which accelerates the project further. When you demonstrate that you are willing to launch early and improve quickly, people gain confidence in the process and become more inclined to support your efforts. The alternative, waiting for a perfect launch, often results in missed opportunities because the market or environment may shift while you are still refining the first version. Rapid iteration also protects you from large-scale failure. When you launch a rough version, the stakes are relatively low, and you can identify critical problems before they grow into catastrophic issues. You discover what doesn't work in controlled environments, which allows you to make adjustments before scaling. Each iteration acts as a kind of pressure test, gradually increasing the reliability and resilience of the product or system. This incremental approach de-risks the overall project because it distributes learning across many small cycles rather than concentrating all uncertainty into a single big launch. Moreover, iteration helps you uncover insights that no amount of theoretical research could reveal. Real usage data, user behavior, and systemic responses provide information that can guide your next move more accurately than predictive models. Over time, these insights compound and result in a much stronger product or solution than would have been possible by attempting to perfect it behind closed doors. Starting with a rough version is not a sign of impatience or carelessness. It's a strategic decision to prioritize learning and speed over the illusion of control. It recognizes that complex problems cannot be fully understood until you engage with them directly, and that the best way to build something extraordinary is to allow it to evolve through constant refinement. Rapid iteration demands courage in facing imperfection, but it is precisely that willingness to be imperfect that accelerates growth. Each version carries the seeds of the next improvement, and each improvement reduces uncertainty and increases confidence. Instead of spending time worrying about getting everything right on the first try, you focus on solving the next immediate challenge and letting progress accumulate through focused effort. People who embrace iteration think in terms of systems, not isolated events. They understand that a continuous stream of enhancements builds a robust foundation for long-term success, and that breakthroughs often emerge after multiple cycles of trial and error. With each iteration, you refine your understanding of the problem space, identify leverage points, and build a deeper intuition about where to apply effort. This iterative discipline becomes a competitive advantage because it allows you to move faster than others who are still planning or refining their first release. Rapid iteration also encourages a culture of accountability and transparency. When everyone sees the results of each cycle, they become more engaged in the process and more willing to contribute ideas and improvements. Feedback is no longer theoretical. It is grounded in actual performance and tangible outcomes. Mistakes become part of the learning narrative rather than sources of blame, and that mindset fosters collaboration and innovation. At its core, starting with a rough version and improving rapidly is about respecting reality more than theory. It is an acknowledgement that progress comes from engaging with the real world, not from trying to predict every variable in advance. The willingness to launch early forces you to confront what is truly essential and strips away the distractions that often accompany long planning cycles. Iteration keeps you grounded in action, and action is the only thing that transforms ideas into meaningful results. Rather than fearing criticism or failure, you use each version to gather information, assess response, and refine direction. Whether you are building a product, launching a new initiative, or tackling a complex engineering challenge, the principle remains the same. The faster you iterate, the faster you learn, and the faster you move toward a solution that actually works. People often talk about visionary thinking as if it's a single leap into the future, but the truth is that vision is realized through thousands of small improvements guided by real feedback. Moving forward without seeing the entire path is an approach that pushes you to embrace uncertainty as part of the journey and forces you to rely on principles rather than complete information, because real progress rarely comes from having every step mapped out in advance. People tend to feel comfortable only when they believe they understand the full route to their destination. But complex goals and ambitious projects are never fully visible from the beginning. Instead of waiting for total clarity, the most successful individuals move ahead with the information they have and allow each step to reveal the next. When you take action, you unlock new insights and opportunities that were completely invisible before, and by consistently acting on these incremental discoveries, the path gradually unfolds in front of you. If you insist on trying to see the entire journey before taking the first step, you end up stuck in analysis and hesitation. Progress requires motion, and motion creates perspective. It's only after you begin that you can identify which obstacles are real and which were imagined. You realize that some of the fears that seemed impossible to overcome were actually exaggerated projections of what might go wrong. Once you begin, you start to build real momentum, and that momentum gives you confidence to keep pushing forward even when uncertainty remains. Each small win deconstructs the illusion that you need total clarity before acting. Instead, you begin to trust your ability to adapt as you move. The value of adaptability becomes far more important than initial certainty, and you begin to prioritize learning from real-world conditions over maintaining a false sense of comfort. Many people imagine the future as a straight path, but in practice it consists of constant course corrections. The willingness to move even with incomplete instructions builds the resilience necessary to navigate those course corrections. You begin to develop a mindset where obstacles are just part of the terrain rather than signs that you should stop. This mindset is the key to reaching destinations that others never approach because they waited too long hoping to find a route free of friction. As you keep moving, your understanding improves, and you start to see patterns that weren't visible at the start. These patterns help you make smarter decisions, and each decision becomes more precise than the last because it's based on actual experience rather than speculation. Clarity does not emerge in a single moment. It builds progressively, layer by layer, as you solve problems and gather data from every step you take. Thinking about the entire journey at once can feel overwhelming and discouraging. Breaking it down into manageable actions allows you to focus your energy on what is directly in front of you. You stop trying to predict the entire future and start engaging directly with the present challenge. By doing this, you reduce the psychological pressure that comes with the need for certainty and redirect that energy into productive efforts that move the needle. When you look back after some time, you realize that the path looks obvious in hindsight, but at the start it was completely unclear. That's the power of progress. It turns uncertainty into clarity over time, not before the work begins, but because the work is underway. The truth is that no transformative goal is achieved by waiting for guaranteed outcomes. The people who build extraordinary things cultivate the ability to tolerate ambiguity and act decisively despite it. They are driven not by perfect knowledge, but by conviction that what they are building matters enough to pursue even when the details are not fully defined. That conviction fuels endurance, which allows them to remain committed even when the path takes unexpected turns. In this way, action becomes a form of discovery. Every step brings you new information, and that information becomes an asset you use to refine your next move. Without taking that first step, you don't gain the most valuable resource, real-world feedback. You only gain hypothetical ideas that may or may not reflect actual conditions. Waiting for complete clarity is an attempt to avoid discomfort. But discomfort is a natural part of forging new territory. Those who move forward despite uncertainty come to understand that discomfort is a sign of growth rather than danger. They learn to interpret it as a signal that they are stretching past their previous limitations and moving closer to something meaningful. When you move forward even without seeing the full path, you also broaden your perception of what is possible, because taking action places you in new environments where unexpected opportunities appear. These opportunities often reshape your understanding of your goal in positive ways. Opportunities that no amount of planning could have predicted show up in the process of action. This is why staying rigid in your plan can sometimes be counterproductive. You must remain flexible enough to incorporate new information and bold enough to act without having all the answers. There will always be unknowns that can only be resolved once you commit to the journey. Letting those unknowns dictate in action is like refusing to start a puzzle until all the pieces are placed in the correct order. The act of assembling the puzzle is how order is created from chaos. Every attempt gives you more information about the shape of the bigger picture, and slowly but surely, the picture begins to make sense. The clarity you are seeking is not hiding somewhere in the distance waiting to be found. It is waiting to be created by your actions in the present. Progress brings understanding. Experience builds intuition. Momentum generates breakthroughs. None of these are available to someone who remains stationary. At the start, you may only see the first step or two, and that can feel insignificant when compared to the magnitude of your goal. But taking those small steps is how you prove to yourself that movement is possible. With each step, you break through the inertia that keeps most people in place. Eventually, the path becomes clearer, and the pace accelerates because your growing experience allows you to foresee challenges more accurately and navigate them more efficiently. Uncertainty is no longer a barrier. It becomes the context in which you operate effectively. The more you engage with it, the less intimidating it becomes, and over time you realize that clarity was never a prerequisite for action, but rather an inevitable outcome of it. Everything you desire to accomplish lies just beyond the edge of what you currently understand, and to reach it, you must be willing to proceed without waiting for